So my name is Rosie Santana, and I have met some of you, I think, through my other work, work with Region 17, and we provide services to Montana and Idaho. The title of our participatory session is called Acceleration of Learning Multilingual Learners. Like I said, we provide services and work alongside in a collaborative nature with both Idaho, Montana as a Region 17 comprehensive center. And our goal is to improve student outcomes, close any achievement gaps, and increase the quality of instruction. And we do that in partnership with your state department. So for our participatory agenda, and I keep saying participatory because I do want to hear from you in the chat, we'll have an essential question. We'll talk about some strategies that we drew upon from the Ed Recovery research, and there's a form called Taking Stock, and it really has us think about when we're thinking about high quality education, when we're thinking about multilingual learners, some questions we can take back and ask ourselves at our appropriate schools. So the first one, and you notice it says Mentimeter, but with only 7 of us here, why don't we go ahead and put in the chat, what are you hearing, noticing about the pandemic experience? So what are you, maybe in the newspaper, maybe with your colleagues? So what is out there as people are talking about this pandemic experience in terms of what's happening with education and schooling? So go ahead and put that in the chat. And if anybody wants to be a brave soul and unmic themselves and rather talk, that's fine too. Anxiety. Concerns about learning loss. Stress. Yeah, you're right. You know, we are hearing about learning loss, stress that's happening. And what we want to do, so one of the things that we'll talk about is how do we counter this idea of learning loss narrative? So what do you mean, Rosie? They did lose some instruction, right? We weren't able to, we were doing this virtual work. Some were not on face-to-face with students all the time. Some had to do some packet work. I mean, what do you mean counter this learning loss? So the idea is that, you know, using words like learning loss and may have the potential to fuel conversations about remediation or create a mindset of expecting less from students, right? So really it was instructional loss, right? It was the instruction that they were not able to be a part of. So just really coming in with a mindset, an asset base, and say, where do we start? So we want to consider countering narratives, but at the same time, not dismissing the very real experiences that our students have had. So we're going to talk about accelerate, not remediate. So remediate holds the connotation to what I just talked about, right? Expecting less from students, maybe lower expectations. But we're going to go in not with that, but just instructional loss. You know, how do we recover some of that learning and now that we have them back, whether it's masks or however, you know, we have them back, we can now get started on the work and not think bring any of the expecting less mindset, but just bringing forward to how can we address with this with high quality learning experiences that have impact on our most vulnerable. So there's some ideas that we can do that. So we can focus on the quality of education the students were receiving before the pandemic, but now let's really think about how do we bolster that high quality learning experiences for our students. So the essential question would be then, how can we address the American Recovery Plan or to meet the needs of our learners. So we know that funding is targeted towards those students who were most vulnerable. We have our special ed, students with disabilities. We have kids who lived in poverty or living in poverty, and we have English language learners that fit within that, among other groups. So how can we meet their needs of the multilingual learner? We're going to consider some strategies today from the Ed Research for Recovery at the Annenberg Institution. And what they did is during the pandemic, they put together these research briefs. At the end of this, you'll have a link to those research briefs so that you can read them in more detail. They did the briefs on students who are living in the crisis of poverty, students who are experiencing homelessness, students who are multilingual learners. And that's going to be our focus today. If there's time, I'm just going to touch a little bit on students with disabilities. But what they did is they asked these central questions, and then they put together some key insight, some things to consider for us to think about back at our districts. So drawing upon their research and their knowledge, one of the strategies to consider was this idea of small group instruction. So as we're doing this, be thinking about how, as we've come back to the from the pandemic, has small group instruction taken place? Did you add more teachers so that there could be more? Did you add more teachers? Maybe you added another EL teacher so that they could push in more or pull out more with smaller groups of students? Because as we recover that instructional time and we accelerate our high quality instruction on our end, because it's our work that needs to be done, how did we work with our small groups? So are there paraprofessionals who are that you also use? Was there hiring of that something that you might want to consider? So we know when we do small group instruction, it's going to aid in stronger student-teacher relationships. How many of us have been told by our paraeducators or people who work in smaller groups that they've learned something about that student in a smaller setting than when they are with the whole group? The fantastic thing about what they're learning about their students is the idea is that their students are sharing them with them something I'm going to call their funds of knowledge. And we'll talk about that in another slide. So, but it basically means is as we listen to our students in these small groups and they're sharing their information about their learning, those are the things that we can then asset-based minded say, what did this kid tell me about himself as a learner? What is it that I learned about his family that we can then draw upon that maybe my co-teacher didn't know? Hey, did you know today I learned that in his house he has books in Spanish and in English? Or did you know that they brought the refugees that came over? They were able to bring some things, or they get language through stories. So these are things that we can learn from our students that we can then build upon as we're working with them, and we'll address that on some of the other slides. But be thinking that in mind, this idea of their funds of knowledge. And that's the second point, right? Embracing the funds of knowledge that they bring. Where do they get these funds of knowledge? It's experience, but it comes from home. What they've shared in their culture, what their family values, what they share when they're breaking bread with their family. This is what they come with. And then we need to be able to, as teachers, say, okay, so he has this concept, but in the academia world, in his school culture, we call it this. So making that connection. Because kids already come with these wonderful assets, right? Not to pick on Carol DeWitt or any of that work. I think it's wonderful. We do want growth mindsets. We do want grit. But I will tell you that kids that live in the crisis of poverty and kids that have experienced any experience with the refugee or any experience with migration, they kind of have grit in spades. What they need now is how do we help them make those connections between that they have to the academia, right, into the world, into their academic world. We want to make sure during our small group instruction, we want the student's sense of self and recognizing they belong. This doesn't only happen in small group instruction, by the way. This is as a whole. So how are we considering? I know one of my colleagues is doing some work on social emotional because we also know this is another area that we are talking about because of that idea that I said earlier. I said, let's not dismiss the very real concerns and experiences that our students have. Have kids lost their sense of belonging? Have they lost their schoolness and what it means to belong in school? Do they see their culture in this school? Do they see that they belong here? Does the, so do they feel and recognize themselves in the school? That's part of that high quality instruction. That's part of that acceleration. Teacher, you accelerate it for me and you don't even know it. When we're in this small group and you bring my culture into this, or we're reading a story about something I already have experience with, I start to engage as the learner. You've augmented, you're accelerating, right? So some of these things are also with what we're doing with SEL and addressing that sense of belonging as our students return back from the pandemic, from whatever learning experiences they had before. And we know with small group instruction, it just leads to higher levels of trust and engagement, right? So when you're meeting with them in small groups or your teachers are meeting with them in small groups, they trust you with to help me as a learner. They trust you to engage them as the learner, right? And that's going to involve with this acceleration, really that partnership with them, right? So that you really have rapport and alliance to help them be like the learner that they need to be, right? To give them that cognitive insight. So students who feel they belong, have the trust of their, and have built trust, right? And know that they're going to be safe from any academic or social threats because the teacher really knows them, really has their back. You've just created a place for them to now accelerate that learning. And there's a little bit of brain research in here because teacher, when I'm relaxed in that relaxed state, there's no cortisol running through me, making me feel stressful and making me back up to being scared about this learning or scared about whether I belong. You have me in this relaxed state of learning, and I can now absorb some of the information that you're sharing. And when you're working with me, I have that trust and engagement that you've created in our learning partnership. So thinking, continuing with small group instruction, one of the things we think about too is, how are we bringing in and encouraging families to draw upon their native language? So this, even though we're talking small group instruction, we're talking about the whole child, right? That child comes to you with all their background, whatever language it is that they're speaking, and we want to embrace the fact that our families have another language. Kids can learn so many concepts through that other language that then we can bridge as they're becoming and as they're apprenticing in the English language. And then later they'll appropriate that language and it will be theirs. But to honor that native language and make those connections will help with that as well. And then, of course, family engagement programs. Be thinking about how you are engaging your families, if you have interpreters there. I mean, really, with your ARP funds, you have an opportunity to now. Do you remember? Let's see, Title I. I think we called them impact meetings, right? Is that what we called them when we had two annually, or we used to have those meetings? And not because we had to. Of course, we wanted to connect with our parents, but thinking about the funds and how that be more impactful. Could it be that you want to look at hiring more interpreters? Could it be that you want to make it more engaging so that interpreters are a part of that? And the reason why I'm saying more engaging is I'm going to hit on a term called oral cultures and print cultures. Most of our multilingual families come from what we call an oral culture. It's very participatory, it's very collective. Um, Print culture sometimes can be very linear, not as participatory, more like talking at instead of talking with. So as you rethink your parent nights and your family engagement programs, think about how can I bring in some of their cultural ways, meaning their oral cultural ways of engagement, so that not only is it just about the interpreter, but how can I engage my families to share with us how their students learn naturally at home. They might not even realize that students are learning naturally at home. You can engage that by asking the parents, what type of stories do you tell? What's it like at the dinner table? And you would do it in a way that just to preface it saying, learning happens all the time. We want to appreciate the learning you as the first teachers by just asking you some questions that you could share with us. How does the learning happen? Do you cook together? When you go shopping, what are the conversations you have? We'd like to draw on that as we're working with our students because we value their experiences at home and the connections to school. So I'm going to stop there. And so what has anything I've said so far before we go to the next strategy? What is one word or thought that crept into your mind or you maybe even want to know more about as I did my short presentation on this strategy or this consideration? Put it in the chat box, please. Yes. Funds of knowledge. So that's really good. You know, you can Google that and you'll find so much on that. But the basic idea is exactly that. You're right. How do we embrace? That's that asset base. And it comes from students' lived experience, cultural experiences, homes and families, starting with their first teachers. That's what we first think of with funds of knowledge. And then it does come, of course, with academia, right? Because then they learn from school too. Kids get their experiences from having lived them, school, and having lived them means with their families. Thank you for that, Karen. Yes, we need to think about it as instructional loss. The next consideration is high quality resources and technologies. So here we want to provide a more targeted approach. So what are our districts doing in terms of programs that they're using out there? I know there's things like Duolingo. I know there's things that can be translated. So what are we looking at? You now have the funds to get those technologies. Are there software that can help the kid with translation that the student can use as he goes throughout his day? Investigate those, and it's a well spent or use of you to give the kid access to comprehension, right? To understand what my teacher is saying. Are there special tools out there that we know of that help, you know, with the language? Are we taking advantage and teaching our teachers? If you're going to do PowerPoint, there's a way to have closed caption in Spanish or whatever language that they're working with. So, you know, have we talked to our IT person to tell us these things? Because we can get so busy with starting school and with the other things that I just said that sometimes we might forget, hey, does the IT person know about? Hey, teachers, when we were in our crisis teaching mode the first week in May of 2020, if y'all remember that, we were all in crisis teaching. What did you find? What software did you find? What should we invest in? What should we to really help our students get access, right? And so, and then think about what you did. Was there more gestures? Did you go and use your document camera more? So how do we bring those things back into the classroom, especially with our upper grades, right? You know, how do we still bring gesture? Because one of the ideas around language, and as you bring in, we're not bringing in new WIDA standards. I got Andrew Bennett in my mind right now, but enhance strategies that are coming with the new WIDA. And if you're not familiar with WIDA, it's the language standards for your multilingual learners in Idaho. And within that, they're thinking not only about language being, you know, what we hear and we read, but gestures, that's language too, like, right? So, and how we feed off, and they're calling that interpretive language, right? How they interpret from drawings. And so language they get from that. So, you know, are we bringing those in? So ask the teachers, gather around. What did we do? Make a list. How can those come in for our high quality resources to our acceleration? Let's not shy back from them because the kids are now in front of us. Those were the things that we did that can really help with this. Did you demonstrate more? Did you do more think alouds? So ask what they felt they did more, and then talk about how that remains in existence when they're face to face. And just that multimodal, and that's why I was talking about the gestures. We talk about instructional materials explicitly designed to develop English proficiency. So this is an opportunity for you to really look at your EL program, right? Your multilingual program. Now, of course, you know, a lot of us look at the reading part of it, and we think of our tiered instruction when we're doing our literacy. And sometimes we have the L's pushed in and we're teaching them the structure of language, the phonemes that exist in our language. We also, something I'd like you to consider is, you know, how much is devoted to that word recognition part, but how much is also devoted to the idea of using language so that they can appropriate it. So even like staring at the minutes of that to see what that looked like, so that you have that nice balance of students actually using language, appropriating language, a skilled sequence way in which you are addressing language. There are many programs out there, Imagine Learning, English in My Pocket, Carousel, that do this. So how do you have that nice balance of not only for the foundational skills of reading, which are the phonemes of the English language, but the actual learning to speak the language, read the language, and write the language. And so we have an idea for that on this. And that's going to be what we talk about, how we have collaboration between content teachers and EL teachers. Because here's the thing, we all need to embrace that we are all teachers of language. Language is inherent in the standards. We're all language teachers if you think about it. So there's some more ideas on the slide that talk about translation, designed specifically for EL students, those technologies. So while you can easily Google and curate a list, I would start with your teachers and your IT. You know, maybe they're familiar with some programs. They might not be, because I have ran into IT who only do infrastructure and all that, and they're like not really clear on the curriculum, but that might be a good start. So we're going to pull on that thread of teachers being, all teachers being teachers of language in a little bit. But before I go any further, in the chat box, what ideas, something that was said, you want to know more about? Something you agreed with, something that made you say, amen, we're doing that. Mm-hmm. How are you feeling about the technologies? There's not a lot out there yet, but it's coming. Definitely. Multimodal. A lot of people think when we say that we're talking elementary. No, I'm talking high school, middle school as well. Okay, let's go to another consideration: extended learning time and small group tutoring. So that's, once again, you know, did any of you do a smart start and include specifically ALS and a focus on ALS? Are any of you doing any after school programs looking for alignment with that? Are you finding time within the day to extend some of those targeted needs, just for that additional support? You know, very much focused and targeted, that is scaffolded, continues to do that RTI approach of access to the core curriculum. And then making sure that the groups are flexible, right? So, you know, are there times when multilingual learners are in a certain group for a certain skill? Are they in a certain group for another skill? And this is something we really need to consider. I know most schools are embracing now the flexible grouping in RTI, um, conceptually, but are we really following Carlitos in his day and seeing what is his instructional plan? And if Carlitos is always being pulled, Carlitos is always in this group, Carlitos doesn't get to experience other language models from other students because he's never in those groups. Carlitos is in a big whole group, and when he shares, he tends to only share with the kid who speaks his language, or he tends to only, so really looking. In fact, uh, one of the things that you can think about when you're thinking about, Carlitos's experience, and I would ask you to do this when you go back, is pick 2 or 3 of your multilingual learners and trail them for the day and see what they're experiencing. Watch what's going on, because what happens is we sometimes accidentally box some of the kids and not really give them other experiences. So that kind of is like counter flexible grouping. But here's another thing what it's also doing. Carlitos cannot explain to you because he doesn't have the language yet. I'm feeling kind of othered. Like I'm feeling like I'm this person who does these things all the time. We may inadvertently be hurting my sense of belonging. We may inadvertently be creating me to believe myself as a learner is always this kid who gets cornered and pushed places, right? So, how do we counter that? Well, one thing, teacher, is make sure that I also get to get involved and be in whole groups. Make sure that my flexible grouping includes lots of levels, so that I know that I can learn from other students, and I know my part as a learner. So that's something to consider as we're thinking about this idea of flexible grouping. I'm going to pause there. Think about your extended learning time and small group tutoring. What's going on in your districts? How are you being utilized if you are an EL service provider? Put it in the chat box. Yeah, Smart Start is something that schools had developed where they some have it actually in their literacy program. Some just adopted that name for we're going to have a certain amount of targeted students who would start school earlier, just so that we can give them some accelerated um, practice on how to engage in school, or maybe accelerated um, prerequisite skills, targeted for this. We have to be very careful that we don't throw everything at them and then expect them to have it when school starts. It's really, really targeted to what students should need to know. What are the high leverage skills that students need to know, or prerequisite skills? So that would be the 1 or 2. And then what are those student learner conditions that we want to help them be ready for? So I hope that was helpful. Actually, some reading programs do this thing called a Smart Start anyway. And I don't mean reading, it's just my area is literacy, but I've seen programs where they've relaxed a little bit. The kids are coming back, and we have to be careful that we're not going, we got to start now. We had instructional laws, we got to go, and get this all in their little brains. But the Smart Start allows us to go, okay, we have them back as learners. What are we going to do that first week that invites them to the learning, teaches them the learning moves, gives them some prerequisite skills, before I got to get into this curriculum, so that's called the Smart Start. And so and you can actually do it for the whole class. It doesn't have to be for the targeted. Maybe it's something you're going to develop for as kids are returning or they've returned. So how are we going into the water, right? And going the waters of learning, right? Did we just throw them over on the dock, or did we just jump in, or how did we slowly go in that, right? Because we're not discounting their experiences, but what is our Smart Start? What did we do in the past? What can we do differently? Because there has to be a different. These kids have experienced something. We experienced something. Some of us are still stressed and worried that we might have to go back, right? So that's the discussion of the Smart Start. So thank you for letting me elaborate on that with the question in the chat box. Yes, we're being participatory. Remember, we're at the table. Yes, it's kind of like pre-teaching. only it's really getting those high leverage, student responses that you need. Maybe it's a protocol that you want students to be really good at. For example, in one program, they want the kids to be good at a protocol of what the teacher's moves will be and what the students' moves will be. That way, if they're clear on the task, their brain just has to pay attention to content, right? So it might be, student, when I bring out this notes, these are going to be our free notes. Let's practice it. It's kind of like our routines, but giving us more grace to set those routines. Remember how we were taught, set your routines at the beginning and all that? Smart Start gives us grace to really get those high leverage routines because of what has happened from the pandemic, right? Reminding the kids that they are learners, reminding the kids that this happened, but we're moving from it because you're learners. Intervention groups in ELA and math based on the needed support targeted skills. Yes. Yes. So, it is. So a lot of this, we might be thinking, well, Ruthie, this is kind of stuff we know. It is, but we're going to augment it. We're going to accelerate it. We're going to make that. Let's compare. How did we used to say this was a targeted intervention? Does that mean we need to look closely at our assessment program, our comprehensive assessment plan? Does it mean we need to give more attention to our informational data that we're getting, right? Our informative data that we're getting? Are teachers taking advantage of more informative data as we're beginning? And by the way, that's probably what we should be taking advantage of, is the informative data that we're getting every day from our students. I'm not discounting the bigger pieces that we do with iStats that help us form groups and all that. I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is, as we remember that metaphor I did with the lake? This informative assessment is where we really want to hang out too. Okay, so how did that hit you, that comment that I said about we really want to hang out with informative assessment? Yeah, we have time. We have time. We can breathe, teachers. We can do this. We can do this. Right? That smart start, thinking about how we're going in, really learning from that experience. Oh, hi, Kathy. Kathy and I got experience. Okay. And then here's the one that I really want to push. Here's what I want to push. Remember, I said we're all teachers of language. We are. How are we, and have we considered how we're collaborating with our multilingual service teachers, our EL teachers, with the general education teachers? Because I can tell you guys, I'm still experiencing almost a separateness. Like, I'll do PAD and I'm like, where's the L teacher? Oh, they're off doing their own PD. We should be doing PD together, right? Because these are our children, and language is inherent in the standards. Students, today you will be comparing, contrasting. Compare and contrast is a function of language. That involves language. That involves reading, thinking, speaking. All that is involved in the language. So this is where I'm really going to push and have you think about it. Remember, I talked about earlier that WIDA has come out with some new enhanced instructional practices, and you'll probably hear about it down the road, but you probably heard it first from me. I'm going to tease Andrew Bennett on this one. But actually, it's really been talking about how we have these key language usage. Kids narrate, they argue, they explain, and they inform. Those are what we call the big genres. Is it not true that that happens in every classroom? So then that's what I mean about a shared belief and vision that students benefit from the wisdom and expertise of both of the teachers in the grade level or subject, not just their own EL teacher, right? I was working in a state where I wanted to have this conversation with the EL teacher, because one of the things I kept hearing her saying was, these are my babies and my students and mine. And I was just like, they're theirs too. They're both of yours. How are we coming together? Because if we're not careful as EL service providers, we say they're ours and we gather up our little pollitos, right? We gather up our little chickadees and we work with them. But these kids then leave us and go to the general ed classroom. They are theirs too. So how are we working each other and supporting and embracing this idea that we are all teachers of language? Well, that's going to need some professional development for some teachers because that in itself, it might be, yeah, I embrace that, with the whole mantra and the concepts. But what does that look like in the classroom? We have an opportunity now with any increased funds that you have to help teachers understand what does it mean to be a teacher of language. How can we shore up tier one learning experience by embracing this so that the kids are learning language with the general ed teacher as well as with, remember looking at that whole child? So I watched Carlitos and I noticed missed opportunities during his whole time for language to be developed within content. We're not asking our biology teacher or our social studies teacher to be the ELD teacher, right? But we are noticing that there's language that's happening in those classes that the students can then uh, apprentice, practice the language of social studies, practice the language, and then what it looks like in writing, we call it their pen language. What does their pen language look at? All within the context of their content. And then Carlitos, he walks to his other class where he's getting language specific. He's learning about language. He's learning how to read in English because when he's back over here with the whole group, that wonderful teacher has scaffolded the reading for him, has provided it in his other language. But at the same time, the teacher has embraced that they're a language teacher and they have maybe some sentence frame. They have checked with how kids are using their language. They're using words like, okay, say that again in your pen language. How might we encounter it in print? So they're just really embracing the language. And we do this with native speakers of English because not only do we have English learners, we have alls. We have L's and alls. Who knows what alls stands for? Put it in the chat box. Alls are academic language learners. We have native speakers of English who do not have the pen language, who do not have the scholarly academic language. And that's fine. That's what schooling is all about. Can I just say one thing about language? One of the things we want to do when we embrace that we are all language teachers is to make sure that we hold that language serves a purpose, right? We want kids to discern language. And we want people to know that the language that they come to us with, Lisa Dalpit calls it the language in which they are loved, their home language, is beautiful language. It's not inferior, it's not superior. So if we could, as we're working with language, embrace that idea as well. I know some native speakers of English that when they're breaking bread with their families, they say ain't, gonna, saw, I seen him, right? They're breaking bread with their family. When they get to school and they're writing and we're working and we maybe have to do a speech, we talk about the conventions of the English language. And when we're writing and doing the speech, we say, I saw, right? Not in, it's not I seen. Oh, that's almost telling a kid your language is terrible. No, we want to embrace that no language is superior or inferior. That's home language. We transition them into school language or academic language that we use. And like I said, you can call that their pen language if they're writing. Some schools use other language. So I demonstrate that for you because it really belongs with this slide here, right? So how do we help teachers embrace that? How do we help them see that they're all teachers of language? Do we provide time for co-planning for our Ls? Are the Ls included in the general ed training? And if they are, speak specifically to the person who's providing the training and ask them how they're going to address that, right? Even if ask them the types of questions they'll ask the EL personnel to think about to make the connection. So think about, are your trainings still separate? Are they've never been separate? Awesome. And then just really setting a culture around the belief that every teacher is a teacher of language. We are all language teachers. Okay, you're going to see me kind of step down here. You know why? I just stepped off my soapbox. my so because this is something I so believe in because teachers are amazing and they can do this. So tell me what you thought. I stopped. Got down off my soapbox because this is one that is my passion was working with multilingual learners and general ed teachers. What did it spark in you? Put it in the chat box. Yeah, our students, not my students, not your students. Yeah. Watch the language you're hearing around your school. Your students, they're our students. Those students. Which students? Your students during fifth period? So I'm going to stay quiet. What are ideas, thoughts, wonderings? Have you even, maybe you've already done this. Don't forget the amen. You got some amens, throw them out there. If you got some, I want to know more about that, throw that out there too. Yes. Yeah, I appreciate the comment about the connections with culture because your students, your multilingual learners, we are not asking them. We used to, no, maybe we never used to. I should watch my language. But there were times when kids would come and then they think they had to shrug off their culture and then pass the threshold of the school. We know they don't have to do that anymore. You come in, you should never feel that you're shrugging off culture. You come as a whole student and we embrace that. We don't erase it. We embrace it. Great. Okay, so on this one, what I would want you to do is just think about each one of those special considerations or considerations and think what you're currently doing and what sparked your interest, because that could be an area that you could go back and pull on. Like you could say, hey, I was at this coffee table because there's really only 8 of us and went to this coffee shop and we were talking about this. How do we handle that? Do our schools believe that they teach language and that language is inherent in the standards? How does our small group look? How have we taken advantage of the multimodal way of teaching that we adopted during our crisis teaching in May and got better at as the year went on if we had to continue that during the 2021 school year? How have we brought those back? So I want to talk about the taking stock. I'm going to go ahead and end this because there will be a handout for you. It's right here, and I'm going to put it in the chat box right away. So please pull it from the chat box right away. Do you all see it in the chat box? Click on that and put it in your drive. It's yours. Now, here are just taking stocks conversations we can have around this idea. The one that is, to me, is like we can really leverage the high quality instruction for our multilinguals with the co-planning, with bringing the idea and the concept of we are all teachers of language. So what you would do is you'd read through these statements with your whoever would engage with you, your staff, your leadership team, and discuss the extent to which each of these applies to your school, not replies, applies to your school. So there are questions like this. Educators in my school or district are aware of the language demands that standards present for multilingual learners. See, there's a difference there. Not aware of the standards, aware of the language demands. Because in our standards, there are analytical practices. That's a fancy word for the verbs in our, right? Bloom's taxonomy, Norman Webb's depth of knowledge. Those are analytical practices. Kids today, we're going to compare and contrast, we're going to evaluate, we're going to report, we're going to synthesize, we're going to um, uh, develop a story, write a narrative, we're going to narrate, we're going to argue, we're going to explain. All those verbs have within it linguistic demands. So as we're working, EL teachers know when we're working with ELs, we say, okay, so what is the linguistic demand here? What's the cognitive load on the student? As the regular content teacher, we can do the same. because they're all our students. So what do I understand about the language and the standard? Are the administrators in my school have or are the process of implementing a plan to support language demands? Is there? Are we talking about language demands when we're talking about our multilingual learners? Um, Try using that word when you're meeting with a group. How are we supporting our multilingual learners? Well, let's see, our multilingual learners are attempting to learn the language of the instruction that we currently have, unless I'm in a dual language or bilingual school, right? That's a whole nother conversation because we're able to, capitalize on this would all be about dual language, dual, right? The language demands in Spanish, the language demands in English, if that was the other language in the program. I'm not going to read them all to you, but give me a thumbs up if they're presenting on the slides, if you can see them. Perfect. So I'm just going to stay quiet and let you read them, and then I want you to react to these statements. Hey, if you could put in the chat box, which one of these statements do you feel like, as I'm reading these statements, some of them, as I think of my district or as I think of my context, um, it would be good. It would be good for us to have this conversation around. Um, I know this idea of, integrated standards for English language development and content standards is like the ultimate embracing of we're all language teachers, because as a teacher and in my school, when I plan for content, I think about the language. And that's what I was referring to earlier when I talked about the enhanced instructional practices in WIDA, which talk about these key language usage, narrate, inform, explain, and argue. It's just even at that point, I know as a general ed teacher that I'm not only preparing them for my content, but I'm preparing them as speakers of the English language, right? And I'm supporting that two-way. And then I know that when they go to get their specified English language development, what they're doing there. So we have integrated, we've collaborated around, Carlitos that I was using earlier. I'm going to go ahead and read. That's really great. So I hope you find some of these statements affirming. Some of you are finding that your district does provide an appropriate amount and variety of materials, resources, and support for multilingual students in their home language. Yeah. And you're also looking at staff allocation, library books. Yes. And when you say library books, look for ones that are not only just translations, but really embrace culture and they see themselves in those books. Yes. So just even somebody's put here about you. Well, you can read it too. Leveled books in both Spanish and English. Yes, that's great. Okay, yeah, a lot of you really centered in on the cultural piece, and we're finding that it was very affirming to you, and that's awesome. Do you think that your leadership team would be open for a dialogue around these kinds of statements? And it wouldn't be just because, oh, I went to this little workshop, here's these statements. But it would be more about, as you look at the context of your school and you're thinking of your multilingual learners, would it be a benefit to think about these statements or the considerations? And what would be your entry point as you think about your funds, how you're using your funds? What would be in your context, the best bet for your funding and to reach our multilingual learners? If you had to choose one of the considerations or yeah, thank you for that. If you had to consider one of the considerations or even of the statement, is there one that really stood out for you that you're like, I don't know how I would answer this one? If you could put that in the chat, that would be great. It's good feedback. Yeah, because many of us in this call right here or this session, we are the service providers for our multilingual learners. And we need to think about what would be an entry point, to best suit the work as I'm working with my administrator. But also taking stock, how do I go back and affirm what we're doing too? This is not just about um, great entry points, but it's also affirmations. I hope you're finding some. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and bring back the PowerPoint. Okay, so I will put in the chat box a link to all the Ed Research for Recovery briefs. Like I said, there's a little bit on students with disabilities that we'll touch on a little bit, but mostly I really wanted to augment the multilingual learner as we think about acceleration through high quality instruction. So I want to just touch a little bit on students with disabilities and just share with you some of the concepts that came from that research brief. And then I will put in the chat the link to all the briefs, actually a link to the links of all the briefs. This is what you'll be getting in the chat. So as you look at that resource, once again, it really outlines some key insights from the research that they had done and then strategies to consider and they even talk about strategies to avoid as well. So I think, at the close of this, once you download them or put them in your drive, this could be, further information that's informing your practice or informing some of the policy decisions or structural decisions that you're making back at your schools. I see that we have some people just joining, and I know we're scheduled to go further. The thing with us being such a small group and sitting around a coffee table is that we are probably going to end a little sooner. Give me a thumbs up if that's going to be okay with your schedule. Okay, thank you for the feedback on that. Otherwise, I could talk forever on this. Okay, so here's the consider strategies to consider. And just going to make sure that great, thank you for that. Just some feedback on the comment that I made. So once again, the theme that you're going to see across all these briefs is the idea of small group intervention. So as you're thinking about that instructional loss, you know, how did you use those funds if you did hire, more paraeducators or more certified personnel, maybe with an ESOL certificate or having that, that education, how did you do that? Because that's going to also help, you know, with your small group, but also be thinking about how do you rethink your small group that you have done before. And then if you're in secondary, how are you thinking about your time, your block of time? Does it always have to be whole group? Can you envision smaller group during your block of time? Could it be that a whole session is on a Monday, Tuesday, you break up into the small group? I mean, so some way to think about it. Or are you getting to this concept maybe through your scaffolding, right? So especially those of you in secondary schools, I'd be interested to see, if I could be a fly at that leadership table as we're coming back from this pandemic, this idea of small group intervention, does that mean it's sixth period and they go there, and then that's how we handled it? It was sixth period, they went there? Or how did we are we doing any small group in our secondary? And what does that look like? And how can we share from each other? Right? Just to cover any of those skills that any prerequisite skills that the student may have needed, especially our students with disabilities. We can definitely have some accommodations and those things in the classroom, but how are we going to give that really intense in that small group? Another thing that you're going to find is interventions supported by regular collections of student data, focusing on the skills and concepts known to predict academic or behavioral outcomes. And even though this brief talks about it with students with with students with disabilities, and I would say just different abilities, but we want to make sure that I think this is for all of us, right? I mean, think about it. What is the data that we're using back? Remember I said earlier, I talked about it, that informative data. I think that should still be something we're thinking about, right? And what are those high leverage standards? What are the, by GOTS, they really have to have um, for our multilingual learners, but also for our students with learning disabilities. What's going to give them their bang for the buck? Because those students, depending on where they fall in their language development, on the language development scale of WIDA, or our students with learning disabilities, where they fall as far developmentally, knowing the content, where can we give them the best bang for their buck? But also coming back from the pandemic, that whole bang from the buck is kind of embraced with the smart start, right? Where we're doing some prerequisite skills. And that's why I shared early with you that some did it as a free time before, some do it after, some made it part of just a regular program. And they took the first 2 weeks of school to do what they called their smart start. And they really hit some high leverage. And you're right, it is somebody put in the chat, it's like the procedures we teach. It's like the pre-teaching. Yeah, but it was with a more augmented, targeted focus, real intention about what would be presented during those 2 weeks of Smart Start or week of Smart Start. Um, all that you're going to see as you look across these briefs is going to be strong instruction, high quality instruction. Especially, we want the most qualified with the most vulnerable. And then training for our para educators, because I know we want the most qualified with the most vulnerable. I get it, but I think of our little rural schools up 93, and I think of, that just do not have maybe the funding for that. Maybe they can use some of the funding with this, but I think that how many of you have found, because I sure have found, with the proper training and investment in our para educators, we have some quality para educators out there. We really do. And so how are we investing in our para educators? And how are we growing them? I know that some funds can be used. I was sat in on another states, and they talked about how they're growing their own, how they are really helping and created stipends for some of their para educators to go back in school or to get a learning. Um, so that's something to think about as well. How are you growing your own, starting with your paras? Something to think about.